Well, hello there. Are you here to visit someone?
Yes, Margaret, I'm Emily.
Oh, Emily. I like that name. Are you family? Your father would have wanted you here. He would have wanted me happy, Margaret. All this time. Margaret. I know. I'm sorry.
The letter arrived on the same afternoon Emily Harper learned her mother no longer remembered her name. It was waiting in the narrow metal mailbox outside her apartment in Columbus, Ohio, tucked between a grocery flyer and a water bill she had forgotten to pay. At first, she almost missed it. The envelope was pale blue, the color of winter sky just before snow, with her name written across the front in a hand she had not seen in years and still knew before she allowed herself to know it. Emily Rose Harper. Not M. Not sweetheart. Not the short, practical version her coworkers used in the art room at Franklin High. Her full name, written slowly, carefully, as if each letter had been placed there by someone afraid it might disappear. She stood under the weak porch light with her keys still in her hand, staring at the handwriting until the cold began to settle through her coat. 3 hours earlier, she had been standing in room 214 at Maple Glen Memory Care in Erie, Pennsylvania, with a paper cup of coffee cooling between her palms while her mother looked at her with gentle confusion and asked, "Do I know you, sweetheart?" There had been no cruelty in the question. That was what made it harder. Margaret Harper had not looked angry, disappointed, or ashamed. She had smiled the polite smile she used to give strangers at church bake sales, the kind that made room for kindness without making room for history. Emily had thought she was prepared. Daniel had warned her over the phone that their mother's memory had become uneven, that some days were better than others, that she might ask the same question twice or call the nurses by names from 30 years ago. Emily had told him she understood. She had even said it in the calm voice she used with difficult parents at school conferences. But understanding something from 300 miles away was different from standing in front of the woman who had once braided her hair before first grade, who had taught her how to peel apples in one long ribbon, who had not called her daughter in almost 18 years, and hearing that woman ask if they had met before. Emily had not cried. She had nodded, introduced herself as Emily, and watched her mother repeat the name with a small, uncertain warmth, as if tasting a word from a language she used to speak. Daniel had stood by the window with his arms folded, looking older than 45 and too tired to be angry properly. A nurse named Alicia had touched Emily's elbow before she left, and said there was something Margaret had wanted mailed when this day came. Emily had not understood what that meant. Not then. Not while she was driving back through the gray Pennsylvania afternoon, past bare trees and gas stations, and the long frozen edge of Lake Erie. Not while she crossed into Ohio with the radio off and one hand pressed tight around the steering wheel. But now the blue envelope trembled slightly in her fingers, and the answer seemed to be breathing inside it. The postmark was 2 days old. The return address belonged to Maple Glen. The handwriting belonged to the mother who had forgotten her face. Emily went inside without turning on the television. Her apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet she had built for herself on purpose. No family pictures in the hallway. No holiday cards on the refrigerator. No old things left where they could ask old questions. She set the envelope on the kitchen table and took off her coat slowly. For 7 minutes, she did not open it. She washed a clean mug. She checked her phone. She moved a stack of student watercolor projects from one chair to another. Then she sat down as if sitting before something fragile. The glue on the envelope had yellowed at the edge. Her mother must have sealed it years ago. Emily slid one finger beneath the flap, careful not to tear her name. Inside was one folded sheet of stationery, thin and soft from waiting. At the top, in the same blue ink, her mother had written the date, October 14th, 2018. Emily stopped breathing for a moment. 8 years ago, before the room at Maple Glen, before the white bracelet on Margaret's wrist, before the woman who had taught children to read could no longer remember the name of her own daughter. Emily unfolded the page. The first line was not "Dear Emily." It was not "My sweet girl." It was not any of the words she had spent half her life pretending she no longer wanted. The letter began with a sentence so quiet it seemed to lower the temperature of the room. If you are reading this, it means I have failed at the one thing I begged God to let me keep the longest. Emily read the first sentence 3 times before she let herself move to the next one. The kitchen around her stayed exactly the same, but something in it seemed to shift. The humming refrigerator, the clean mug by the sink, the stack of student paintings on the chair. The small life she had built in Columbus with quiet routines and locked drawers suddenly felt less like peace and more like a room where no one had been allowed to speak. Her mother's letter continued in careful blue ink, each word shaped with the patience of a woman who had spent most of her life teaching children how to sound out hard things. I asked God to let me keep your name even after I lost the grocery list, the hymns, the street I lived on, and the faces of people who had been kind to me. If I could keep only one name, Emily, I wanted it to be yours. Emily pressed the page flat with both hands, as if the paper might fold itself back into silence. She wanted to feel angry. Anger had always been easier. Anger gave her something to hold. Anger had carried her through college applications she filled out alone, through holidays spent grading papers instead of going home, through the years when Daniel stopped asking if she was coming for Thanksgiving because the answer had become its own tradition. But anger did not know what to do with a sentence like that. It stood in her kitchen with nowhere to put its hands. She looked again at the envelope. Pale blue. Her name on the front. The flap opened carefully, not ripped. She remembered that color from childhood before she understood why. Margaret had kept a box of blue stationery in the small desk near the dining room window. As a girl, Emily used to steal single sheets and fold them into pretend invitations for tea parties she never actually held. Her mother would find the crooked paper cups on the carpet and say, with a tired smile, "At least invite me properly next time." Back then, Margaret Harper knew every name in the house. She knew which neighbor needed sugar, which church member had surgery, which library child could not read yet, but pretended he could. She remembered birthdays, casserole recipes, dentist appointments, the exact day the first daffodil usually opened beside the porch steps. The world trusted her with small details. That was why Emily had spent so many years believing her mother's silence was a choice. The letter waited under her hands. It did not defend Margaret quickly. It did not ask for forgiveness in the dramatic way Emily might have expected. It moved slowly, the way her mother had always moved through a crowded kitchen, careful not to knock anything over. I do not know what you have been told about me. I do not know what Daniel has said, or what I failed to say, or what story you had to build so you could live without looking back. Maybe you think I stopped loving you because I stopped calling. Maybe you think I let you leave because it was easier than asking you to stay. If that is the story you have carried, I cannot blame you. I helped write it with every year I stayed quiet. Emily's throat tightened, but she did not look away. Outside, a car passed slowly through the apartment parking lot, its headlights sliding across the blinds and disappearing. She thought of room 214 at Maple Glen. Her mother sitting in a soft green cardigan, hands folded on a blanket, asking Emily if she worked there. She thought of how politely Margaret had smiled when Emily said, "I am your daughter." Not a mother receiving a lost child. Not a woman struck by recognition. Just a kind stranger trying not to make another stranger uncomfortable. The memory should have hardened Emily. Instead, the letter made it ache differently. Her phone buzzed on the table. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. She watched it ring until the room went still again. There were too many things she could not ask him yet. Too many things the letter might answer first. She turned back to the page. Near the middle, Margaret's handwriting changed. The lines became slightly uneven, as if the pen had paused more often there. There is one night I have never forgiven myself for, even though I know the truth is more complicated than blame. You were 19. Your father had been gone 11 months. The house was full of his absence. Thanksgiving came, and all 3 of us sat at that table pretending the empty chair was not louder than any of our voices. Emily closed her eyes. She could see it before she wanted to. The brown tablecloth. The cranberry sauce still shaped like the can. Daniel slicing turkey too carefully. Margaret standing by the stove with her back turned a little too long. And the 4th chair, pulled out but untouched, as if grief itself had been invited to dinner. Emily opened her eyes again, but the old room had already returned. And with it came the sentence her mother had spoken that night. the sentence Emily had carried for 20 years without knowing what had broken underneath it. The sentence had sounded small when Margaret said it, but small sentences can become doors when a house is already full of ghosts. Thanksgiving of 2006 had come early and cold to Erie, Pennsylvania, with a thin skin of ice on the porch steps and gray light pressed against every window. Emily was 19 then, home from her first semester at a community college she had chosen because it was close enough to prove she had not abandoned anyone and far enough to breathe between classes. Her father, Thomas Harper, had been gone almost a year, though the house still arranged itself around him. His work boots remained beneath the mudroom bench. His fishing jacket hung in the closet with a grocery receipt from the previous winter still folded in one pocket. His coffee mug, the chipped one from Prescott State Park, sat at the back of the cabinet because no one had the courage to move it or use it. Margaret kept the house clean in the way people clean when they cannot fix what is wrong. She polished the dining table. She washed curtains that were already clean. She stacked mail by size. She made lists on blue stationery and crossed off tasks that did not matter. Buy celery. Pick up rolls. Defrost pie crust. Call Emily. That last one appeared often, though Emily did not know it then. All she knew was that her mother had become careful with her, and careful was not the same as close. Before grief entered the house, Margaret had been the kind of mother who hummed while folding laundry, who knew how to make tomato soup taste like a full meal, who left notes in Emily's lunch bag with tiny sketches of birds or flowers in the corner. After Thomas died, she still did these things sometimes, but they seemed to come from far away, as if some warmer version of her had been locked behind glass. Daniel tried to become useful. He fixed the loose cabinet hinge. He shoveled the driveway before sunrise. He spoke to their mother in a low voice when bills came. Emily watched him turn into a second adult and hated him for doing it so quietly. At the table that Thanksgiving, the three of them sat with enough food for four. The empty chair remained at the end because Margaret had said moving it would make the room look strange. Emily thought leaving it there was stranger. Daniel said grace, though his voice flattened on the word father. Margaret passed the mashed potatoes. No one spoke about the chair. No one spoke about the fact that Emily had been sleeping less, or that Daniel had started checking the furnace at midnight, or that Margaret had not sung in church since the funeral. Silence did not arrive all at once. It grew like frost from the corners inward. Then Emily asked, too sharply, why they were pretending. Daniel put down his fork. Margaret looked at the cranberry sauce. Emily said the house felt like a museum for a man they all missed and a prison for the people still breathing. She wanted her mother to look up. She wanted her to say that she knew. She wanted one honest sentence. Instead, Margaret closed her napkin into a neat square and said, maybe if you stopped running from this family, you would understand what it takes to keep one together. The words did not rise. They landed. Emily felt them with a stillness that frightened her. Daniel whispered their mother's name, not as a warning, but as a plea. Margaret's face changed immediately, as if she had heard the sentence only after it left her mouth. But by then, Emily had already pushed back her chair. She walked upstairs without shouting. She packed a sweater, 2 pairs of jeans, her sketchbook, and the small tin of charcoal pencils her father had given her the Christmas before he got sick. From the hallway, she could hear Margaret moving dishes in the kitchen with careful, useless quiet. Emily waited for footsteps on the stairs. She waited for a knock. She waited for her mother to open the door and become the woman who used to sit on the edge of her bed after bad dreams. But no one came. That was the first version of the story Emily carried, the one where she left because her mother let her. Years later, the letter would tell her that downstairs, Margaret had been standing at the sink with both hands under cold water, unable to move, whispering her daughter's name like a prayer she had already started losing. Emily did not leave the house in a dramatic way. She did not slam the door hard enough to shake the windows. She did not shout down the stairs or wait in the doorway for someone to stop her. That was not the Harper way. In that house, Payne usually put on its coat quietly and stepped outside before anyone admitted it had been there. She came down with her backpack over one shoulder and her sketchbook pressed against her chest. Daniel was standing near the dining room, holding a dish towel he had forgotten to use. His eyes moved from her face to the bag, then toward the kitchen where their mother was still running water over clean plates. "Emily," he said softly, but he sounded more tired than surprised. She looked past him. She wanted Margaret to turn around. She wanted her mother to hear the weight of the backpack, the final sound of her sneakers on the hardwood floor, the way the house was about to lose another person, and pretend it was only weather. But Margaret did not come out of the kitchen. Later, the letter would say she was standing there with one hand on the counter and the other pressed against her mouth, afraid that if she opened it, only the wrong words would come out again. Emily did not know that then. At 19, she only knew the door closed behind her and no one followed. Outside, the November air had turned sharp. A thin, freezing rain had begun to fall, tapping against the streetlights and the roofs of parked cars. Emily walked 4 blocks before she realized she had forgotten her gloves. She kept walking anyway. The Greyhound station near downtown Erie was small and bright in the wrong places, with vending machines humming against one wall and old plastic chairs lined up beneath a television no one was watching. She bought a ticket to Columbus with the emergency cash folded behind her student identification card. The bus would leave at 11:40 that night. Until then, she sat near the window and watched strangers come and go with duffel bags, paper cups, and the kind of certainty she wished she had. At 10:18, she called home from the pay phone near the restroom. It rang until her hand hurt from holding the receiver. No answer. She hung up, waited 2 minutes, and called again. Still nothing. At 10:47, she called one last time. This time, she whispered, "Mom, please," though no one was there to hear it. That was the moment something inside Emily went still. Not broken exactly. Quieter than broken. She placed the receiver back in its cradle and decided that if her mother could sleep through her leaving, then Emily could learn to live without being called back. She boarded the bus with wet hair, cold fingers, and her father's charcoal pencils tucked into the front pocket of her backpack. When Erie disappeared behind the dark windows, she did not know that a storm had knocked out the line on Sycamore Street. She did not know the house phone had never rung. She did not know Margaret would wake before dawn, find the front hall empty, and drive to the station wearing the same cardigan from dinner, carrying Emily's forgotten gloves and a blue envelope with no address yet written on it. Margaret reached the Greyhound station a little after 6 in the morning, when the sky over Erie was still the color of wet newspaper and the city looked as if it had not yet decided to wake up. She had driven there with Emily's gloves on the passenger seat and the heater blowing too hard against her face. The streets were slick from the night rain. Fallen leaves clung to the curb. Every red light felt personal. By the time she pulled into the small parking lot near the station, her hair was loose from its pins and her cardigan was buttoned wrong, though she would not notice that until much later. Inside, the station smelled like burnt coffee, old carpet, and bus exhaust seeping in each time the doors opened. A man behind the counter looked up from a newspaper when she asked about the late bus to Columbus. He was kind in the careful way strangers become kind when they already know their answer will hurt. He told her it had left on time. 11:40 the night before. Gate 3. Margaret nodded once, as if she had simply been given directions. She thanked him. She even apologized for bothering him so early. Then she walked to the row of plastic chairs by the window and sat down with Emily's gloves in her lap. There are moments when a person does not cry because grief is too close to the bone to become tears. Margaret sat very still. She looked at the vending machine where Emily might have bought a pack of crackers. She looked at the pay phone near the restroom, the black receiver hanging neatly in place. She looked at Gate 3, though there was no bus there anymore, only a gray rectangle of pavement shining with rain. In the blue envelope she had carried from home, there was nothing yet except a blank sheet of stationery. She had pulled it from her desk before leaving, not knowing why. Maybe she imagined finding Emily in one of those chairs and handing her a letter because speech had failed them both the night before. Maybe she believed a mother could write her way across a silence she had made with her own mouth. But Emily was gone, and the envelope had no address. Margaret sat until the station began to fill with morning travelers. Then she stood, folded the gloves together, and drove home with both hands fixed tight on the steering wheel. Daniel was waiting on the porch when she returned. He had called the phone company and learned about the storm outage on Sycamore Street. The line had gone dead sometime after 10. No calls had come through. He told her this softly, almost carefully, as if placing a glass on the edge of a table. Margaret did not answer right away. She looked past him at the front door Emily had walked through, then down at the glove still in her hand. That was the first time Daniel saw his mother become older in a single morning. Not gray-haired, not weak, just older in the way regret can age a face when it has nowhere to go. For the next week, Margaret kept the blue envelope on the dining room table. She wrote Emily's name on it 3 times before choosing the 4th version. Emily Rose Harper. The full name. The name from the birth certificate. The name she had whispered into a hospital blanket 19 years earlier, when Thomas had stood beside her with red eyes and a paper cup of coffee he had forgotten to drink. But she did not know where to send it. Emily's old dorm address no longer worked. Her community college office said they could not give out student information. The friend Margaret remembered from high school had moved to Arizona. So Margaret wrote the letter anyway. She wrote, "I went to the station." She wrote, "The phone never rang." She wrote, "I said a cruel thing because I was tired and grieving, but tired grief is still responsible for the words it sends into another person's heart." Then she folded the page, slid it into the envelope, and placed it in the top drawer of the desk by the dining room window. The next Friday, she wrote another one. The Friday after that, another. Some were only 3 sentences long. Some filled both sides of the page. Some began with apologies. Some began with ordinary things. "The daffodils came early this year. Daniel fixed the back step. I made your father's chili and still put in too much cumin." Years passed, and the blue envelopes gathered quietly in the drawer, each one addressed to a daughter who did not know her mother was still trying to find the right door back to her. But the letter Emily held in her kitchen in Columbus was not one of those first letters. It had been written much later, after Margaret began losing other names too. The first name Margaret lost was not Emily's. That was what made the final letter feel less like a confession and more like a countdown. It began with Mrs. Whitaker from the church choir, a woman Margaret had known for 26 years, whose peach cobbler recipe she had once copied onto an index card and kept in the kitchen drawer. One Sunday after service, Mrs. Whitaker touched Margaret's sleeve and asked if she was coming to the fellowship lunch. Margaret smiled, opened her mouth, and found only a blank space where the woman's name should have been. She covered it with warmth. She said, "Of course, honey," the way women in church hallways sometimes do when affection can hide uncertainty. No one noticed. Or maybe they noticed and chose mercy. Then came the name of the pharmacy on West 8th Street, though Margaret could still drive there without thinking. Then the title of a hymn she had sung since girlhood, even though her lips remembered the melody. Then the word colander, which disappeared one Tuesday afternoon while she stood in her kitchen holding pasta over a pot and laughing softly at herself because the alternative was too large. Daniel noticed before she told him. He noticed when she asked twice what time her doctor appointment was, when she put the milk in the pantry, when she called the neighbor's Labrador by the name of a dog that had died in 1998. He did not make her feel foolish. That was one of Daniel's quiet gifts. He would simply step beside her and say the missing word gently, as if handing her something she had dropped. Margaret tried to make jokes about it. She told him everybody forgot things after 70. She said the human brain was not a filing cabinet. She said if God wanted people to remember everything, he would not have invented calendars. Daniel smiled when she said these things, but sometimes Emily's old room heard him crying late at night. It had become his office by then, though he had changed very little. The walls were still the pale yellow Margaret had painted when Emily was 12. The closet still held a box of school ribbons, a pair of worn figure skates, and 3 sketchbooks Margaret had found after Emily left and never thrown away. Daniel kept bills on the desk and a toolbox under the window, as if practical objects could make the room less haunted. Every month, he sent Emily a short email about their mother. Most went unanswered. Some received polite replies after several days. "Thank you for letting me know. I hope she is doing all right." Emily wrote like someone standing on the far side of a locked gate, not because she felt nothing, but because feeling had once cost her too much. Margaret read every reply when Daniel printed them. She held the paper close, touching the black letters of Emily's name at the top of the email. She never asked Daniel to tell Emily about the drawer. Not yet. Shame can become a second language in a family. It teaches people to say whether when they mean loneliness, fine when they mean help, later when they mean please do not leave me like this. By 2018, Margaret knew something was changing faster than ordinary age. She began writing notes to herself on blue stationery and taping them around the house. "The sugar is in the left cabinet. Daniel comes by after work. The spare key is under the ceramic rabbit." One morning, Daniel found a note taped to the bathroom mirror that said, If you forget other things, remember Emily Rose Harper. He stood there a long time before taking it down. That afternoon, Margaret asked him to drive her to an appointment at the memory clinic near St. Vincent Hospital. She wore her navy coat, pearl earrings, and lipstick the color Emily used to call church pink. In the waiting room, she sat with her purse in her lap and a blue envelope tucked inside it. When the doctor spoke gently about decline and planning ahead, Margaret did not fall apart. She listened. She asked questions. She wrote down 3 words she wanted to remember: Daniel, Emily, home. On the drive back, Lake Erie lay flat and silver beyond the road. Daniel kept both hands on the wheel. Margaret looked out the window and said, "I am not afraid of forgetting the stove or the mailbox or the day of the week." Then she opened her purse and touched the blue envelope. "I am afraid of forgetting that I owe my daughter the truth." Daniel did not answer right away. He had spent years being loyal to the mother who stayed and angry at the sister who left. But in that moment, the line between them softened. Margaret turned to him and said, "When the time comes, I will need someone braver than me to make sure she gets this." Daniel thought she meant him. Years later, he would learn she had chosen someone else, because some promises are easier to keep when they are placed in the hands of a stranger. Margaret did not move into Maple Glen all at once. At first, there were smaller arrangements, the kind families make when they are trying to be hopeful without saying they are afraid. Daniel came by before work to check the stove. A neighbor from church brought groceries on Thursdays. A plastic pill organizer sat beside the kitchen sink with the days printed in bold black letters. Margaret wrote notes to herself on blue paper and placed them where a future version of herself might need kindness. Turn off the porch light. Lock the back door. Daniel has the spare key. Emily teaches art in Columbus. She did not know how Daniel had found that last detail. He had searched the school website one evening after a long shift at the hardware store, not to spy on his sister, but to prove to their mother that Emily had become someone real and safe and still reachable somewhere beyond their silence. There was a faculty photograph of Emily standing in front of a bulletin board covered with student paintings. Her hair was shorter than Margaret remembered. Her smile was polite. Her eyes looked guarded in a way that made Margaret touch the computer screen with 2 fingers. "She looks like your father when he was trying not to laugh," she said. Daniel almost told her to call. He almost said the years had already taken enough from them. But he had also seen Emily's emails, short and distant, written with the careful manners of a person who had survived by drawing boundaries. So he printed the photograph instead and placed it in a folder with the blue envelopes. After that, Margaret looked at it every morning. Some mornings she knew exactly who Emily was. She would say, "My girl became a teacher," with a pride so simple it made the kitchen feel warmer. Other mornings, she studied the picture with concern and asked Daniel whether the young woman needed anything. He learned not to correct her too quickly. He would say, "She is doing all right," and Margaret would nod as if that answer had been the thing she was waiting for. The blue envelopes kept gathering in the drawer, but the final one stayed in Margaret's purse. She carried it to doctor appointments, church services, and the beauty salon where a woman named Denise trimmed her silver hair every 6 weeks. The envelope became worn at the corners from being touched. Emily Rose Harper remained clear across the front. In the winter of 2019, after Margaret left a pan on the stove and forgot why she had walked to the mailbox in snow boots and no coat, Daniel began visiting assisted living places. He hated himself for it, though there was nothing cruel in the search. Love sometimes has to make decisions that feel like betrayal from the inside. Maple Glen was not fancy, but it was clean and quiet, with wide windows, a small chapel, and nurses who called residents by name even when the residents could not return the favor. Margaret visited once with Daniel and spent 20 minutes speaking with Alicia Morales near the common room piano. Alicia was in her early 50s, with kind eyes and a voice that never hurried anyone. She asked Margaret what music she liked, whether she preferred tea or coffee, and what helped her feel like herself on hard days. Margaret answered carefully, "Hymns, coffee with too much cream, blue stationery." Then she opened her purse and showed Alicia the envelope. "This is for my daughter," she said. "Not now? Later." Alicia did not ask for the story the way curious people might. She simply held out both hands, palms open, as if being trusted with something sacred. Margaret did not give it to her yet. She only looked at the name on the front and said, "When I do not know her, she needs to know I did." Daniel heard the sentence from across the room, and for the first time in years, his anger toward Emily loosened into something almost like grief. He understood then that his mother was not preparing to be forgotten. She was preparing to be misunderstood for the last time. By the following spring, Maple Glen had a room ready on the second floor. Room 214. Daniel carried in her clothes, her framed wedding photograph, the ceramic rabbit from the porch, and the folder of blue envelopes from the desk. Margaret carried only her purse. Before leaving the old house, she stood by the dining room window and looked at the drawer that had held so many unsent apologies. Then she touched the final envelope once and whispered, "Not yet." But the day would come, and when it did, the person who mailed it would not be Daniel. At Maple Glen, Margaret learned the shape of smaller days. Breakfast came at 8 in the dining room with oatmeal, toast, and coffee poured into thick white mugs that kept the heat longer than the hands holding them. Mornings smelled faintly of laundry soap and cinnamon, because someone in the kitchen believed cinnamon made everything feel more like home. The hallway outside room 214 had framed prints of Lake Erie in summer, though for most of that first year Margaret preferred the real window, where bare branches moved against the sky and the parking lot lights came on before dinner. She adjusted with the quiet discipline of a woman who had spent her life making the best of things she did not choose. She folded her cardigans into the top drawer. She placed Thomas Harper's wedding photograph beside her bed. She taped one blue note to the inside of her closet door that said, "Your name is Margaret. Your son is Daniel. Your daughter is Emily Rose." Some mornings she read the note and smiled with recognition. Some mornings she read it with the serious attention of a student studying for a test. Alicia Morales noticed the note the first week. She did not make Margaret feel embarrassed. She only said, "That is a beautiful name. Emily Rose." Margaret looked at her for a long moment and answered, "I chose the rose because my mother said every girl needs something soft in the middle." Alicia remembered that. Good nurses often remember the things charts cannot hold. Over time, Alicia learned Margaret's rhythms. Coffee with too much cream. Hymns after lunch. A short walk before the evening news. On difficult afternoons, Margaret liked to hold paper, any paper, but especially the pale blue stationery Daniel kept bringing from the old house. She did not always write words anymore. Sometimes she drew small circles or copied Emily's name over and over, the letters, becoming uneven but still tender. Daniel visited 3 times a week, more when the snow was bad, because guilt had convinced him weather was a test. He brought clean sweaters, library books she might not finish, and updates about a sister he still did not know how to forgive. "Emily is still teaching," he would say. "The school put some student art online." Margaret would nod, proud and distant at once. "She was always good with color," she said one afternoon, though Daniel had not mentioned color. He looked up quickly, hungry for proof that memory still lived in hidden rooms. But the moment passed. Margaret asked if his father would be joining them for supper, and Daniel's face softened into the practiced kindness of someone answering grief twice. In October of 2018, on a clear morning with yellow leaves pressed against the courtyard fence, Margaret asked Alicia to help her walk to the small chapel near the end of the hall. She carried her purse against her chest. Inside was the final blue envelope, still sealed, Emily's full name written across it in the steadiest hand she could manage. The chapel was empty except for sunlight and a wooden cross on the wall. Margaret sat in the front row and rested the envelope on her knees. "I need to ask something," she said. Alicia sat beside her, quiet enough to let the words arrive. Margaret did not cry. She did not make the moment larger than it needed to be. She only explained that one day her daughter might come, and when that day came, Margaret might not know her. "If I look at her like she is a stranger," she said, touching the envelope, "please mail this before anyone talks her out of reading it." Alicia asked if Daniel knew. Margaret looked toward the stained glass window, where blue and gold light fell across her hands. "Daniel loves me," she said. "That is why he may wait. He will want the perfect time. But families lose years waiting for perfect time." Alicia accepted the envelope with both hands. Margaret watched her place it inside the locked drawer at the nurse's station, where medication records, spare keys, and emergency forms were kept. It looked almost ordinary there. That was the mercy and the tragedy of it. The most important things in a life can sit quietly beside paperwork. For years, Alicia kept the promise. She kept it through staff changes, winter storms, Daniel's tired visits, Margaret's good mornings, and Margaret's fading ones. Then, one gray afternoon in 2026, Emily Harper walked into room 214, and Margaret lifted her eyes with kindness, confusion, and no recognition at all. For a moment in room 214, Emily thought her mother was being polite on purpose. It was an old reflex, unfair and immediate, born from years of believing distance had been chosen by both of them. Margaret sat in the armchair by the window with a folded blanket across her knees, wearing the soft green cardigan Daniel had mentioned on the phone. Her silver hair was pinned at the sides. A paper cup of watered-down apple juice rested on the small table beside her. On the wall, someone had taped a large printed schedule for the day: breakfast, music hour, lunch, rest, chapel, dinner. Beneath it, in careful block letters, was another note. Your name is Margaret Harper. Your son is Daniel. Your daughter is Emily Rose. Emily saw the note before her mother saw her. That was the first quiet blow. The second came when Margaret looked up and smiled with the tender caution of a woman welcoming a visitor from church. Hello, she said. Are you one of the teachers? Daniel, standing near the dresser, closed his eyes for half a second. It was not frustration. It was the exhausted mercy of someone who had lived through this kind of moment many times and still never found it easy. Emily stepped farther into the room. Her shoes made almost no sound against the clean floor. I am Emily, she said. Margaret's smile brightened, but not with recognition. More with manners. Emily, she repeated. That is a lovely name. The words entered Emily gently and still found the oldest bruise. She had imagined this visit in many versions during the 3-hour drive from Columbus. In some, her mother apologized. In some, Emily stayed cold. In some, Daniel made a sharp comment and she left before dinner. But she had not imagined being complimented on her own name by the woman who gave it to her. She sat in the chair Alicia brought from the hallway. Daniel talked too much for the first few minutes, giving updates no one had asked for. The weather, the traffic on Interstate 90, a new roof repair at the old house. Emily listened with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Margaret watched them both with interest, as if trying to understand what kind of story had placed these two tense adults in her room. Once, her gaze rested on Emily's face for a little longer. Something passed there, not memory exactly, but a faint disturbance in the water. You have kind eyes, Margaret said. Emily looked down before anyone could see what that did to her. The visit lasted 42 minutes. She knew because she checked the clock too often, searching for an end and dreading it at the same time. When she rose to leave, Margaret thanked her for coming. Then she asked if Emily would be back to teach art again. Emily said, maybe, because the truth was too complicated for a room already carrying so much. In the hallway, Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. I told you it could be like that, he said. His voice was not cruel, but it still landed hard. Emily nodded once. You did. Alicia was waiting near the nurse's station with a look Emily did not yet understand. She asked for Emily's current address in Columbus, saying Margaret had left instructions years earlier. Emily gave it out of habit more than trust. She thought maybe it was about medical paperwork, or an old insurance form, or some small legal detail Daniel had failed to mention. Alicia wrote it down carefully, then placed her hand over the pocket of her scrub jacket as if something inside it mattered. 2 days later, the blue envelope arrived. Now, at her kitchen table, Emily understood that Alicia had not been managing paperwork. She had been keeping a promise. The letter in Emily's hand had moved from Margaret's purse to a locked drawer, from a memory care hallway to the United States mail, from a mother who no longer knew her daughter to a daughter who had spent half her life trying not to need a mother. Emily kept reading. Your brother may be angry when you learn this from me instead of from him, Margaret had written. Please be gentle with him if you can. Daniel stayed for the years you could not. But he does not know everything. Emily stopped there. Her phone still lay silent on the table, Daniel's missed call dark on the screen. Outside, the porch light flickered once in the cold. Inside, the next line waited with the patience of something buried too long. There is a drawer in the old house, and it holds more of the truth than this one letter can carry. Emily did not drive back to Erie that night. She almost did. She stood in her apartment with her coat halfway on, the blue letter lying open on the kitchen table, her car keys cold in her palm. The old impulse to leave before anyone could stop her rose in her again, familiar as a remembered song. But this time, leaving would not protect her from the past. It would only carry the past with her in the passenger seat. So she sat down, placed the keys beside the envelope, and called Daniel back. He answered on the second ring, though his voice sounded as if he had been waiting much longer. "Did you get it?" he asked. Emily looked at the letter. Yes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was not empty. It was crowded with Thanksgiving, room 214, the Greyhound station, printed emails, unopened years. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Alicia told me she mailed something. She said Mom asked her to." Emily heard the hurt he tried to hide. "You did not know what was in it?" "No." His answer came quickly, then softened. "I knew there was a letter. I did not know she had given it to Alicia. I thought, when the time came, she would give it to me." Emily touched the edge of the paper. "She wrote that you might wait for the perfect time." Daniel gave a small laugh with no humor in it. She was probably right. There it was, not accusation exactly, but the shape of one. Daniel had spent years carrying their mother through appointments, confusion, paperwork, winter storms, and small daily losses. Emily had carried absence. Both weights had changed them. Neither knew how to set theirs down without making the other feel blamed. "She said there is a drawer," Emily said. Daniel went quiet. Then, carefully, the desk by the dining room window. "Are the letters still there?" He did not answer right away, and in that pause Emily could hear the old house as if it were waiting on the line with him. The radiator ticking, the porch board settling, the dining room where no one had ever moved their father's chair until years after it stopped being a chair and became a wound. "Yes," Daniel said. "I moved the folder to the hall closet when we sold the desk, but I kept everything." The word everything struck Emily harder than she expected. For years, she had believed the story was simple because pain had made it simple. Her mother had not called. Her mother had not come. Her mother had let her become someone else somewhere else. But now there was a station in the rain, a dead phone line, gloves carried too late, and a drawer full of blue envelopes addressed to a daughter who had thought she was forgotten. "Why did you never tell me?" Emily asked. Daniel's voice changed. Not defensive, tired. "Because you did not ask to hear anything about her. And because I was angry." The honesty sat between them like a third person. Emily closed her eyes. She wanted to argue. She wanted to remind him that she had been 19, that mothers were supposed to cross the distance, that his anger had been easier because he had never been the one waiting at gate 3. But beneath all of that, a quieter truth moved. Daniel had lost their father, then watched his mother disappear a little at a time, while his sister became a name on a screen. "I am sorry," she said, and the words surprised them both. Daniel did not answer at first. When he did, his voice was lower. "I am too." The next morning, Emily called in sick to Franklin High for the first time in 4 years. She left lesson plans on the online portal, packed one overnight bag, and placed the blue envelope in the front pocket where her father's charcoal pencils had once written on another trip out of Erie. The drive north took a little over 3 hours, past flat winter fields, roadside diners, and highway signs dusted with salt. By the time she reached Sycamore Street, the old Harper house looked smaller than she remembered. The porch had been repaired. The ceramic rabbit was gone. The dining room window still faced the street, catching the pale afternoon light. Daniel opened the door before she knocked. He looked at the envelope in her hand, then stepped aside. Neither of them hugged. Not yet. He led her to the hall closet and pulled down a brown cardboard file box with Margaret's neat handwriting across the lid. Emily rose. Daniel placed it on the dining room table. For a long moment, Emily only stared. Then she lifted the lid and saw them waiting there, year after year, pale blue, carefully sealed, each one carrying her name as if her mother had been calling her home in the only way she knew and never had the courage to send. Emily did not open the first envelope right away. She touched the top one with 2 fingers, as if the paper had become something living and easily frightened. The blue had faded differently on each envelope. Some were almost gray at the edges. Some still held the pale color of winter morning. Every one of them carried her name in Margaret's handwriting, changing year by year from steady to careful, from careful to trembling, but never careless. Emily Rose Harper. Emily Rose Harper. Emily Rose Harper. It was strange how a name could become louder by being repeated in silence. Daniel stood near the dining room window with his hands in his pockets, watching her the way people watch ice on a lake, unsure how much weight it can hold. "There are 37, he said. Emily looked up. "You counted them?" "A few times." He turned toward the window. "I do not know why. Maybe I wanted the number to mean something." Emily lifted the oldest envelope. The paper made a soft sound when she opened it. Not quite a crackle, not quite a sigh. Inside, the letter was dated November 24th, 2006, the morning after she left. The words were uneven, written by a woman who had been awake all night and still tried to make her handwriting look calm. "I went to the station," Margaret had written. "I brought your gloves. The phone line was down, Emily. I did not know you called. If this reaches you someday, please know that your mother came, even if she came too late." Emily read that line twice. Then she placed the page on the table and pressed her palm over her mouth. Daniel did not move closer. He had learned, in all those years of caring for Margaret, that not every pain should be interrupted just because someone else wants to comfort it. Emily opened another envelope, then another. The letters did not all beg. Some simply reported life, as if Margaret had been placing small stones along a road Emily might one day walk back. The maple tree lost a large branch in the storm. "Daniel says the furnace needs replacing, but I think he enjoys having something to fix. I saw a girl at the library today with charcoal on her fingers and almost called her by your name." One envelope held a newspaper clipping from Franklin High School, a small article about student art displayed at the county fair. Margaret had circled Emily's name in blue ink. Beneath it she had written, "My girl is still making beauty where people can see it." That was when Emily stood too quickly and walked into the kitchen. The room had changed and had not changed. The cabinets were newer. The yellow curtains were gone. But the window over the sink still looked toward the neighbor's fence. And for one brief second, Emily saw her mother standing there years earlier, hands under cold running water, regretting words she could not gather back. Daniel followed only as far as the doorway. "I was wrong about some things," he said. Emily turned. His face looked tired in the afternoon light. "I made it easy to be angry at you because being angry was simpler than admitting I missed you." Emily looked down at the letter in her hand. "I made it easy to stay gone." Neither apology fixed the years, but they made a small place where truth could sit down. They spent the next hour reading only pieces, not enough to drown in, enough to understand. A Christmas letter with no stamp. A birthday card never mailed. A page where Margaret had written Emily's name 10 times, as if practicing against the future. At the bottom of that page, in smaller writing, was one sentence. "If I cannot say it when she comes, let the letters say it for me." Emily folded the page with more care than she had ever given any object in that house. Then she picked up the final blue envelope, the one Alicia had mailed to Columbus, and slipped it back into her coat pocket. She looked at Daniel, and he understood before she spoke. The letters had answered the silence, but there was still one person who had never heard them aloud. Emily and Daniel drove back to Maple Glen just before evening, when the sky over Erie had lowered into that soft gray color that made every streetlight seem necessary. Neither of them spoke much in the car. The cardboard box of blue envelopes sat on the back seat with a folded sweater Daniel had meant to bring their mother and 2 library books she might not remember asking for. Emily kept the final letter in her coat pocket, close enough that she could feel the edge of it whenever she moved. For most of the ride, she watched houses pass by in small rows, porch lights flickering on one by one. Years ago, she had looked at those same streets through a bus window and believed leaving them would make the hurt smaller. Now she understood that distance had not made the hurt disappear. It had only given it a different address. At Maple Glen, the front desk was quiet. Someone had placed a bowl of peppermints beside the sign-in sheet. From the dining room came the soft clatter of plates and the low murmur of a television no one seemed to be watching. Alicia saw them from the nurse's station and did not ask questions. She looked once at the blue envelope in Emily's hand, then nodded with the tenderness of a person who knows when a promise has reached its hardest part. Margaret was in room 214, sitting by the window with a blanket across her knees. The winter light made her face look both older and gentler. On the table beside her were a plastic cup of water, a paperback mystery turned upside down, and the note taped where she could see it. "Your name is Margaret Harper. Your son is Daniel. Your daughter is Emily Rose." Emily stood in the doorway until Daniel touched her shoulder, not pushing, only reminding her that she was no longer standing there alone. Margaret looked up. "Oh," she said warmly. "Visitors." Daniel smiled and crossed the room first. "Hi, Mom." Margaret reached for his hand as if his face arrived a moment after. His voice. "Daniel," she said, pleased with herself. Then she looked at Emily. There was no recognition, but there was no rejection either. Only open kindness. "And you brought your friend." Emily sat down in the chair beside her. The words might have hurt more if the letters had not already made room for them. "My name is Emily," she said softly. Margaret's eyes moved to the note, then back to her face. "Emily Rose," she read aloud, careful with each part. "That is a beautiful name." Emily smiled, and this time the sadness did not turn sharp. "You gave it to me." Margaret looked surprised by that, then touched the blanket with small, uncertain fingers. "Did I?" Daniel turned toward the window. Alicia, standing near the door, lowered her gaze. Emily took the blue envelope from her pocket. The paper looked fragile under the room's gentle lamp. "You wrote me something," she said. "A long time ago. Would it be all right if I read it to you?" Margaret studied the envelope, especially the handwriting. Something in her face changed, not enough to be called memory, but enough to quiet the room. "That looks like mine," she whispered. Emily unfolded the page. Her voice was unsteady at first, then found its place. She read about the name Margaret had begged to keep. She read about Thanksgiving. She read about the bus station, the gloves, the dead phone line, the years of blue envelopes waiting in a drawer. Margaret listened with her hands folded, sometimes looking at Emily, sometimes at the window, sometimes at nothing anyone else could see. Emily did not expect tears. She did not expect an apology. She did not expect the door of memory to swing open just because love had knocked. She only read. When she reached the line, "If I cannot say it when she comes, let the letters say it for me," her voice broke quietly. Margaret lifted one hand and placed it over the page, not to stop her, but to feel it. Then, in a voice thin as thread but clear enough for everyone in the room to hear, she began to hum the old church hymn she used to sing while brushing Emily's hair before Sunday service. Daniel covered his mouth. Alicia stepped into the hallway. Emily closed her eyes. Her mother had not remembered the story, not all of it. She had not remembered the daughter before her in the way Emily had once needed. But somewhere beneath the broken map of her mind, a song had remained, and it had found the child the name could not reach. The hymn did not last long. Margaret hummed only the first few lines before the melody thinned and drifted away from her, but it had already done what words could not. It had crossed a distance no map could measure. Emily sat beside her mother with the letter open between them, one hand still resting on the pale blue paper, the other folded gently beneath Margaret's. For years, Emily had imagined forgiveness as a door someone else had to open. She had waited for the right apology, the right explanation, the right version of her mother to come back from the past and stand before her with perfect memory and perfect words. But there, in room 214, with Daniel quiet by the window and Alicia standing just beyond the doorway, Emily understood that some doors do not open all at once. Some open only a few inches, just enough for light to enter. Margaret looked down at their joined hands and smiled faintly. "You have warm hands," she said. Emily let out a small breath that was almost a laugh. "You used to say they were always cold." Margaret considered this as if it were an interesting fact about a stranger. "Then I am glad they changed." That was not the reunion Emily had wanted at 19. It was not the ending she might have written for herself at 41. But it was real, and real things, she had learned, often arrived without the shape people expected. The next morning, Emily returned to Maple Glen with a pack of pale blue stationery from a small office supply store near West 8th Street. Daniel came with her, carrying coffee for Alicia and a sweater their mother had forgotten she owned. In the common room, residents were listening to an old piano recording while snow moved lightly beyond the windows. Margaret sat near the chapel door, turning the pages of a magazine upside down with great concentration. Emily sat beside her and placed a blank blue envelope on the table. Across the front, in large, careful letters, she wrote, "Emily Rose Harper, your daughter." Then beneath it, smaller, she added, "Margaret Harper, your mother." Margaret watched the pen move. "That is nice handwriting," she said. Emily smiled. "I learned from you." She did not know if her mother understood. She no longer needed every sentence to be understood in order for it to matter. She wrote a short letter that morning, not to repair the past, not to demand memory, not to make grief disappear. She wrote because her mother had spent years trying to reach her through paper, and now Emily could answer in the same language. She wrote about Columbus, about her students, about the way charcoal still stained her fingers no matter how carefully she washed them. She wrote that she had read the letters. She wrote that she knew about the station. She wrote that she was still sad and still angry in places, but no longer alone inside the story. When she finished, she folded the page and placed it inside the envelope. Then she set it beside Margaret's bed, near the wedding photograph and the note on the wall. Over the next few months, Emily drove from Columbus to Erie twice a month. Sometimes Margaret knew her as the art teacher, sometimes as Daniel's friend. Once, on a rainy Sunday afternoon, Margaret looked at her across a bowl of soup and said, "My girl," with no explanation at all. Emily did not ask for more. She reached across the table and took her mother's hand before the moment could disappear. Daniel started calling her every Thursday evening. Not for emergencies, not for guilt, just to tell her small things. The furnace was fixed. The maple tree had new buds. Their mother had beaten Alicia at checkers without understanding the rules. Slowly, the silence that had once held the Harper family apart became something else. Not perfect, not erased, but answered. Emily took the box of blue envelopes back to Columbus and placed them on the top shelf of her closet, not hidden, not displayed, simply kept. On difficult nights, she read one. On better nights, she wrote one of her own. And every time she sealed a blue envelope, she thought of a young woman at a bus station, a mother arriving too late with gloves in her hand, and a name that had traveled through years of silence to find its way home. In the end, Margaret did forget Emily's name again, many times. But Emily no longer believed that being forgotten was the same as being unloved, because some names leave the mind and still remain in the heart, waiting quietly for the letter that brings them back.